Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years. I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent hunter, shed hunter, and outdoorsman. In this episode, we're breaking down one of the most important truths in shed hunting and one that separates lucky hunters from consistent ones. That's why some areas produce sheds every single year and why others never do. This is authority level understanding. This is pattern recognition over luck. And once you truly see it, you can't unsee it. Every experienced shed hunter has felt this frustration. You find sheds in an area one year, maybe even a pile of them. You come back the next season full of confidence, walk the same ground, and find nothing. Meanwhile, somewhere else, sometimes close, sometimes far, you keep hearing about the same benches, pockets, and edges producing year after year. That contrast drives people crazy. They say things like, that spot dried up, or it must have been a fluke year, or the animals just didn't use it this time. Sometimes those statements are true. Most of the time, though, they're a way to avoid confronting a deeper reality. Not all shed spots are created equal, and not all success is repeatable. Shed hunting rewards areas that solve the same problems for animals year after every single year. When you understand what those problems are and why certain pieces of terrain solve them regardless of winter severity, pressure, or minor variation, shed hunting stops feeling so random. It becomes more predictable. Let's start with the biggest misconception holding a lot of shed hunters back. Most people think repeatable shed spots exist because animals like them. That's not necessarily true. Animals don't like terrain in the way humans think about it. They tolerate terrain because it solves constraints efficiently, and constraints repeat every year. Snow, cold, energy loss, pressure, security, travel efficiency, bedding comfort. Those variables shift slightly from winter to winter, but they never disappear. And terrain that solves multiple constraints simultaneously will always attract animals during the same phases of the season. That's the foundation of annual repeatability. Areas that reload every year aren't just magical, they're functional. They sit at the intersection of multiple needs. They don't rely on perfect conditions. They work across a range of scenarios. And because of that, animals keep coming back, often subconsciously, often without alternatives. This is why certain benches, pockets, and edges produce sheds over and over again. A bench that consistently produces sheds isn't just a flat spot. It's a bench that sits at the right elevation band with the right exposure, the right escape routes, the right bedding cover, and the right relationship to food and pressure. Remove any of those elements, and the spot may still look good, but it won't necessarily reload consistently. This is where a lot of shed hunters get fooled. They focus on features instead of functions. They say, find benches. They say, find south-facing slopes. They say, find winter range edges. And then they wonder why only some of those features ever produce. The difference is function. A perennial shed producer solves the same behavioral equation for the animals every year, even when conditions change. Let's talk about edges, because edges are one of the most misunderstood concepts in shed hunting. An edge is not just where timber meets open ground. That's a visual edge. Animals care about behavioral edges, places where risk changes, where exposure changes, where movement options change. The most consistent shed producing edges are often subtle. The transition from open feeding slope to broken timber, the line where snow depth changes abruptly, the shift from high visibility terrain to low visibility terrain, the point where pressure fades out. Those edges force animals to slow down and make decisions, and decision points are where time accumulates. Time is what helps drop antlers in that spot. That's why edges reload. Now let's talk about pockets. Pockets are small areas that concentrate animal use disproportionate to their size. They're not destinations necessarily, they're relief zones. A pocket might be a sheltered bowl that blocks wind, or a timbered nook that holds shade and cover, a depression that sheds snow faster than surrounding ground, a fold in the terrain that hides animals from above and below. Those pockets often look insignificant on a map. Many hunters walk right past them because they're focused on a larger feature. But animals remember pockets, not in a conscious way like we would, but in a behavioral way. When conditions get hard, animals return to places that worked before, especially when those places continue to solve the same problems year after year, and that's why the pockets reload with sheds. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Luck does exist in shed hunting like in everywhere else. Anybody who says otherwise isn't being honest. You can walk into a random area and stumble onto sheds. You can be in the right place at the right time without understanding why. But luck doesn't repeat. If an area produces sheds once and never again, that's often luck. If it produces sporadically without pattern, that's usually luck combined with some transient conditions. If an area produces consistently across years, winters, and pressure levels, that's not luck, that's structure. One of the most valuable skills experienced shed hunters develop is the ability to tell whether a spot was a one-off or a perennial producer. That's every year. And that skill is built by asking the right questions after success, not just celebrating it. After you find sheds, you've got to ask yourself this: why here? Not why was I here, but why were the animals here long enough to drop their antlers at the right time? Did the area force repeated bedding? Did it restrict movement options? Did it sit at a predictable transition point? Did it offer security under pressure? Did it balance exposure and cover efficiently? If you can answer those questions clearly, the spot has a high chance of being repeatable. If your only answer is, it looked good, or it made sense, that spot is probably a one-off. This is where experienced shed hunters separate themselves from everybody else. They don't just remember where they found sheds, they remember why they probably found sheds. Over time, that builds mental maps that are far more powerful than just GPS pins. Let's talk about those mental maps. Experienced shed hunters don't think in terms of individual spots, they think in terms of systems. They remember elevation bands where shedding consistently occurs in that area. They remember aspect relationships that repeat. They remember how pressure pushes animals into the same types of terrain every year. Their memory isn't a list of locations necessarily, it's a library of the patterns that caused the drop. For example, they might know that in a specific unit, mature animals consistently stage on north-facing benches just below a certain elevation before fully settling into winter range. They might know that under pressure, animals always slide into a particular type of timber edge regardless of snow year. Those patterns allow them to predict new areas that should work even before they've found sheds there. That's authority level shed hunting. It's not about secret spots, it's about transferable understanding. Step into the backcountry and step up your elk hunting game at Elk Camp 2026. This isn't a seminar, it's an immersive experience with real field training alongside successful elk hunters Matt and Saxton Hartsky. You'll learn how elk think and move, break down terrain like a pro, call with confidence, and practice 3 days of real-world elk hunting scenarios that mirror what you'll face on your own hunt. This camp was built to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be in the mountains. With limited spots and hands-on coaching, you'll walk away sharper, more prepared, and ready to hunt with purpose and confidence. Elk Camp 2026. Sharpen your edge. Register now and prepare for the season like never before at backboneunlimited.com. Now let's address why some areas never produce sheds, no matter how good they look. These areas often fail because they only solve problems under narrow conditions. Maybe they work in extremely harsh winters but not mild ones. Maybe they're great until pressure increases. Maybe they're perfect early but dead late. They look good because they work sometimes, but they don't reload because they're conditional. Conditional terrain is unreliable. Perennial, annual terrain is robust. This is a critical distinction. If an area requires everything to line up perfectly to produce sheds there, it's not a cornerstone area. It's an opportunistic bonus. Experienced shed hunters don't build their season around opportunistic bonuses. They build it around reliable anchors. Those anchors are areas that produce across a wide range of conditions. They may not always be explosive. They may not always be obvious, but they almost always give you something, and that consistency compounds over time. Now, let's talk about repeatability in relation to pressure. Pressure changes behavior, but it does so predictably. If an area consistently produces sheds, even under pressure, that's a massive signal. It means the terrain offers security that pressure can't easily erase. Those areas often sit in awkward terrain, like steep hillsides, broken timber, areas with poor visibility, limited access, places humans avoid instinctively. Animals don't avoid those places, they embrace them when pressure rises. That's why some spots reload even as overall pressure increases year after year. Hunters who rely on easy access ground often see their success decline over time. Hunters who identify pressure resilient terrain see the opposite. Now let's bring timing into the conversation. Annual repeatability isn't just spatial, it's temporal. Some areas produce sheds every year, but only during a narrow window. If you miss that window, the area can feel dead. Other areas produce steadily over a longer period, but never spike. Experienced shed hunters learn the rhythm of each area. They know when to be there, not just where. They also know when to leave. This temporal understanding is part of how they distinguish annual producers from the one offs. A one off often produces unpredictably. A perennial or annual producer produces predictably within a known window. That predictability builds confidence. Confidence allows patience. Patience leads to thorough shed hunting. Thorough shed hunting leads to more sheds. Now, let's address one of the hardest truths to accept. Many shed hunters abandon perennial areas too early. They say it was good last year, but not this year. After one slow pass, they assume the pattern broke. In reality, they often missed the window or failed to hunt the micro areas thoroughly. Perennial spots deserve more than one pass, they deserve verification. Experienced shed hunters revisit proven areas multiple times throughout the season, not because they're stubborn, but because they understand how shedding progresses. They don't panic when they don't find sheds immediately. They wait for the pattern to reveal itself. This patience is not passive, it's informed. Another critical component of repeatability is scale. Many of the annual shed producing areas are small, very small. They might be a 100-yard stretch of side hill, or a single bench, or a narrow finger of timber, a short transition between two habitat types. Hunters who focus on just the big areas, they miss those micro spots entirely. Experienced shed hunters shrink their focus over time. They get more precise, not broader. That precision is what turns scattered success into consistent success. Now let's talk about memory versus documentation. Mental maps are powerful, but they're only as good as your ability to reflect honestly. After each season, experienced shed hunters review their finds. They look for overlap, they look for common traits, and they identify which spots produced consistently and which didn't. They're willing to admit when a spot was luck. This honesty is crucial. If you lie to yourself about why a spot worked, you'll waste years chasing shed ghosts. Authority level shed hunters are ruthless about cutting dead weight from their mental map. They keep what repeats and they discard what doesn't work. That process sharpens judgment faster than any tactic. Now let's bring this full circle. Some areas produce sheds year after year because they solve recurring problems for animals. They sit at behavioral intersections. They balance security, efficiency, and energy conservation. They function across conditions. Other areas never produce because they're either too comfortable, too exposed, too conditional, or too transient. The difference isn't luck, it's structure. When you start seeing shed hunting through this lens, your entire approach is going to change. You're going to stop chasing randomness, you stop hoping conditions line up, you stop covering ground blindly, and you start building a system for yourself. And systems can be scalable. If you're serious about sharpening this kind of judgment, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than a membership, it's an inner circle for hunters and shed hunters who want to think clearer, read terrain better, and make better decisions when it matters most. Inside, you're going to get 20% off site-wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, the option to have a t-shirt t-shirt shipped to your door every month, full access to the digital content vault of guides, checklists, and backcountry strategies, a private Facebook group with direct access to me and a community of driven hunters, direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice, and automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. This is built for the hunters and shed hunters who want repeatable success, not just lucky seasons. Thanks for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.